Rescuer finds blind baby bobcat, but next morning's miracle will make you cry. The sun had just begun to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the rugged hills, when Jordan Hayes, a wildlife rescuer with years of experience in the field, stumbled across something he never expected. He had been on his usual evening rounds checking the traps when a soft whimper caught his attention. He paused, listening carefully. At first it was so faint he wasn't sure if it was the wind, but then the sound came again. Pitiful, almost. Pleading. Jordan's heart skipped a beat as he followed the noise through the dense underbrush. His flashlight cut through the gloom, catching glimpses of tangled branches and undergrowth. And then, nestled against the base of a tree, he saw her, a baby bobcat, no more than a few weeks old, her fur matted and her eyes squeezed shut. It wasn't her size or her delicate frame that made Jordan's breath catch in his chest. It was the way she lay there, still, not moving. Her tiny head jerked up at the sound of his footsteps, but it was clear something was wrong. The cubs. Eyes wide open, were clouded and unseeing. Jordan knelt down beside her, his fingers gently brushing the fur on her head. He could feel the faintest tremor in her body, a sign of her fragility. The cub didn't hiss or lash out, which was rare for wild creatures so young. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, the movement more curious than defensive. She was blind. His heart sank as he realized the truth. This little one had been left behind, discarded, abandoned by fate or perhaps by her mother, too weak to survive on her own. Jordan's hands shook as he scooped her up carefully, cradling her in his arms. She didn't resist. She just let out a soft, helpless mew. He could feel her pulse, weak but steady, and he knew he couldn't just leave her out here. The wilderness would be unforgiving, and without her sight, her chances were slim. "I've got you," he whispered. Though he knew she couldn't hear him in the way he intended, he tucked her into his jacket, shielding her from the chill of the evening air as he made his way back to the cabin he'd set up for rescues. He had saved many animals over the years, but something about this tiny bobcat stirred something deep within him. She was so small, so vulnerable, and yet her spirit seemed to fight. Her survival instinct, though blind and frightened, was still there, flickering faintly beneath the surface. Jordan made a silent promise as he carried her home. He would do everything he could to help her. He wasn't about to let this fragile, little creature slip away unnoticed. As he reached the cabin, the evening grew colder, and the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon. Inside, he carefully placed her in a small box lined with soft towels, setting up a warm heating pad beneath. He stared at her for a long moment, wondering if she would make it through the night. He couldn't help but feel a sense of hope stirring within him. Sometimes the smallest miracles came from the most unlikely places. The night felt long for Jordan. The small, blind bobcat nestled into her bed of towels and blankets, her tiny body still trembling from the cold and fear. Jordan sat by her side for hours, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, waiting for any sign that she might pull through. He didn't sleep. How could he, when this fragile creature depended on him for everything? Every few minutes, he would reach into the box, checking the warmth of the heating pad, making sure the cub was comfortable. Occasionally she would stir, her tiny paws moving in the air as if searching for something familiar. But every time she would settle back down, her soft mewing quieter than before. Jordan's heart ached, and the silence of the night seemed heavier because of it. His mind kept wandering, thinking of her mother. What had happened to her? Had she been lost to a hunter's trap, or perhaps had she simply abandoned her cub? It didn't matter, not really. What mattered was that this baby bobcat, blind and alone, had found her way to him. The soft hum of the cabin's heater was the only sound in the room. Jordan finally leaned back in his chair, exhausted but unwilling to leave her side. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" he murmured softly, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. He wished he could tell her she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to fight anymore. He'd protect her as long as she needed him to. As the first light of morning filtered through the cabin window, Jordan felt a strange sense of anticipation. It wasn't just the sun breaking through the dark. It was something in the air, a feeling he couldn't explain. The cub stirred in her box once more, her tiny body shifting slightly. Jordan sat up straighter in his chair, watching closely. His breath caught in his chest. And then, with a soft, hesitant squeak, she did something Jordan never expected. The bobcat cub moved her head, her blind eyes still shut tight, but her movements were more purposeful now. She reached out with one of her tiny paws, stretching it in a slow arc, as though trying to make contact with something, or someone. She stumbled a bit, but her efforts were steady. Jordan watched, wide-eyed, as she pushed herself up, her body shaking with the effort. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she made a small, determined noise, something between a mewl and a chirp. The cub found her balance, lifting her head just enough to rest it gently against the edge of her bedding. Jordan's eyes filled with tears as he knelt down beside her, his heart swelling with a mix of joy and disbelief. In that moment, the little, blind bobcat had done what seemed impossible. She had moved on her own, finding her way, despite the odds stacked against her. A miracle. Maybe. But Jordan didn't care what it was called. He just knew this. She wasn't giving up, and neither was he. The day following the bobcat cub's first steps was filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Jordan didn't want to get ahead of himself, but the sight of her moving, of her small, determined paws finding their way, had left him in awe. The little bobcat, despite her blindness, had made it through the night, and now in the morning light there was a quiet strength in her. He had given her the name Iris, not just because of the delicate violet hue her fur reminded him of, but because her name meant rainbow. And right now she was his hope in a world that so often felt clouded by hardship. Iris was no longer just lying still in her makeshift bed. As the hours passed, she seemed to be exploring her small world, her movements shaky but determined. Every time she reached the edge of her bedding, she would nudge her way back to the center, her body moving instinctively. Jordan watched, fascinated by her growing strength and will. "All right, Iris," he murmured softly, sitting on the floor beside her. "Let's see if we can get you to eat something today." He gently placed a small bowl of formula mixed with nutrients, just the right amount of sustenance for her fragile body, in front of her. Iris sniffed the air, her small nose twitching, and for a moment she hesitated. Jordan's heart raced. Would she drink? Would she recognize what it was? Slowly, with her head tilted, Iris reached out her paw, tapping the edge of the bowl. Jordan held his breath, watching closely, his fingers curled anxiously in his lap. And then, almost as if guided by instinct, she stretched her muzzle forward and began lapping at the formula. A small, contented noise escaped her, a mewing sound that was nearly drowned by the sound of Jordan's exhale. She was eating. She was nourishing herself. The connection between wild and caregiver, fragile as it was, seemed to deepen. "I knew you had it in you," Jordan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He spent the next few hours watching over her, moving as gently as possible so as not to startle her. Iris continued to explore her surroundings, the world still blurry but now within her reach. Jordan knew that every day, every small step forward, was a victory, a gift, a chance at survival. As the evening drew near, Jordan took a moment to reflect. It had only been a day since he found her, and already she was showing signs of resilience that took him by surprise. The wild had a way of teaching patience, of reminding him that things didn't always go according to plan, but sometimes there were moments that defied reason. He sat by the fire that night, staring into the crackling flames, Iris nestled in her box beside him. "Tomorrow we take another step," he said quietly, though he knew Iris couldn't understand him. But that was the beauty of it. She didn't need to understand. She was already moving forward in her own way, and with every step, Jordan believed. A little more in the miracle of it all. The morning came too soon for Jordan. He hadn't slept much. The excitement, the anxiety, the wonder of Iris's survival had kept him up. But the soft light streaming through the cabin's windows was a welcome sight. A reminder that today was another day for Iris to grow stronger. He moved quietly around the cabin, careful not to disturb her. Iris was still curled up in her box, her small body stretched out, her breathing deep and steady. But Jordan could see it, the faint tremor in her paws, the slight twitch of her whiskers, as if she were dreaming. She was still so fragile, and he knew the next step would be crucial. She needed more than just warmth and food. She needed to find her strength, her purpose, even in the absence of sight. After preparing the formula for the day, Jordan placed the bowl near her bed again, hoping she would take the next step. He watched, waiting in silence as Iris stirred. Her eyes, still shut tight, remained that milky, clouded blue, but her movements had grown more confident. She began to push herself up with her tiny, weak legs, the soft pads of her paws shifting in the bedding. Her nose twitched at the scent of the formula. Jordan smiled, his heart swelling with pride and hope. He remained, still letting her approach at her own pace. Slowly, Iris moved closer, her tiny face nudging the edge of the bowl. It wasn't graceful, but it was purposeful. She hesitated for a moment, then, instinctively, began to lap at the food, her tongue quick and desperate. Jordan didn't breathe. Again, until he heard that small, satisfied purr, the sound of life, of survival, of something deeper than just instinct. Iris was feeding herself. By the time the sun was high in the sky, Jordan had decided it was time to let her stretch her legs outside the box. He made a small space for her on the floor of the cabin, covering the area with soft towels, and gently moved Iris from her bed. She seemed hesitant at first, but once her paws hit the new surface, she sniffed around carefully, exploring the unfamiliar terrain with slow, methodical steps. Jordan watched from a distance, his eyes soft with awe. It was as if Iris was finding the world for the first time, each small movement of her paws like a triumph. The sheer determination in her tiny, fragile body was something that would have moved anyone to tears. She may have been blind, but there was nothing stopping her from learning how to navigate the world. She made her way toward the window, her small body swaying with every step, each one more sure than the last. Jordan's eyes began to sting as he watched her, his heart heavy with emotion. It was hard to believe how far she had come in such a short time, from a helpless, blind cub on the brink of death to a small, resilient being determined to live. And then, as if the universe itself had heard his silent prayers, Iris stopped just in front of the window. She lifted her head slightly, as if she could sense something in the air, the warmth of the sunlight reaching her sensitive nose. Her body grew still, the moment hanging in the balance. It was as though she were absorbing everything around her, taking in the beauty of the world she had been born into, even though she couldn't see it. Jordan wiped away a tear, feeling the weight of everything. The miracle that was Iris, the bond they shared, and the promise of tomorrow. The days that followed were nothing short of miraculous. Iris's strength continued to grow, her small body filling out with each passing meal. The trembling that had once marked her every movement became less frequent, replaced by the quiet grace of a creature learning to exist in a world that had once seemed so foreign. Though her eyes would never open, Iris had begun to navigate her world with a clarity that Jordan could only describe as awe-inspiring. Each morning, Jordan would watch as she stretched her tiny limbs, testing her limits. He let her explore more of the cabin, at first with just a few small steps, then with more confident strides. Every now and then she would pause, as if listening to something only she could hear, then continue onward, her ears twitching in perfect rhythm with her movements. Despite her blindness, she was finding her way. Jordan had set up a small enclosed outdoor space for her, an area shaded by tall pines and covered in soft earth. He watched from the cabin as Iris ventured into her new space, her paws padding softly over the ground. The world outside was still unfamiliar to her, but each time she ventured a little further, Jordan's heart swelled with pride. On a particularly cool morning, with the sun still low in the sky, Jordan opened the door to the outdoor space, allowing Iris a little more freedom than usual. She stepped outside hesitantly at first, then paused at the edge of the small wooden platform Jordan had built. He stood a few feet away, watching silently, holding his breath. It wasn't long before Iris began to wander across the dirt, her tiny paws leaving delicate prints in the soft soil. Jordan watched in awe as she moved from one side of the yard to the other, navigating the world as if it were her own. She would stop occasionally, listen, then take another step forward. She was no longer the fragile, abandoned cub he had found days ago. She was a wild creature reclaiming her place in the world step by step. But then, in the midst of her exploration, Iris stopped. For the first time since she had been brought to the cabin, she lifted her head toward the sky. Her ears perked up, and she froze, her body still as a statue. Jordan's heart skipped. Something was different. Iris, blind and fragile as she was, had heard something. Something far beyond what he could understand. And then it happened. Out of the trees, emerging into the clearing, was a figure. A large bobcat, her coat thick and rich with the familiar markings of a wild mother. Jordan held his breath as he recognized the familiar, powerful stride of a creature he knew only from the distance. It was Iris's mother,